Welcome to the Vet Life Reimagined podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Sprinkle, and this episode may be one of the most important episodes so far. Back for Vet Tech Week, I put a post on LinkedIn saying, I need more vet techs on the podcast. Please come share your stories, share your thoughts. And I actually got a great response. Several people raised their hand and said, I would love to be on the podcast. And Alicia Hall was one of those individuals. And we had crossed paths back when we both worked for Royal Canin. And I had no idea all the different things that she had done with her vet tech career. And then, of course, I was curious, why were you so interested in getting on the podcast? This can be kind of scary. And so she tells her the answer. And she tells a lot of great stories throughout the podcast. Like I said, I think this is one of the most important episodes so far. So I hope you listen. I hope you think about things that we talk about. And I'm really interested to hear your feedback. So definitely reach out. Let me know what you think. And without further ado, here is Alicia Hall. We have some very passionate people about this profession, and we want to do something about it because we're passionate, and we see that there is room for improvement and some opportunities to encourage each other. So I want to thank you for that. So let's start kind of at the beginning of your story. When did you know you were interested in getting into veterinary medicine?
So working with animals was always on the table, even from, I would say, maybe around age 6. The stories always still come up every once in a while with my mom talking about how I always had a big heart for animals. So I don't know why, but for some reason in our neighborhood, it seemed like there was always a squirrel that got hit or a snake. And I would be out there literally having funerals for them, even if I was the only attendee. So, so I just had a big heart for animals, and I was essentially an only child until I was 13 years old. And so my main, companion at home and my best friend was my dog, Chester. And so I knew at a young age that I always wanted to do something in the medical field, and being in veterinary medicine was always on the table. But actually, as I went through high school and got closer to graduation, initially I wanted to be a medical examiner and do like human autopsies. I thought that would be really interesting. And I didn't end up doing that. My husband moved up here from Mississippi when we were really young. I think I was like 19, and I was like, well, I'm not going to go to medical school. We were just getting our life started out. And as it happened, there was actually a veterinary technician college right across the street from the apartments that we ended up living in. And I said, I always wanted to do something medically inclined, and I absolutely love animals, and I think that would be a really good fit for me. So I applied to that program and was accepted, and that's how my journey got started.
Wow. So did you have an idea of what you might want to do in veterinary medicine when you started tech school, or were you just curious and open to anything? What was that like?
At that point, I was open to anything. The program that I went through was an accelerated program, and it was extremely difficult. So as I was going through school, the only goal that I had in mind was to graduate.
Finish.
Yes, because we had a couple of tests midway through the program and right before we graduated, where if you failed that exam, you were out of the program.
Wow.
Even if you had already gone, halfway through, and it was a 2-year program, like a human nursing. So it was a lot of pressure, and my only goal at that point was to graduate. And once I graduated, my next big goal was to pass my board exams to get my license. And once I did that, I went into private practice. And at that time, they had just started making specialties available for veterinary technicians. They've had them for veterinarians for a while, but for vet techs, I believe it was kind of a newer thing, and they were starting to add more and more specialties. So you could specialize in nutrition, surgery, like anesthesiology and surge nursing, zoology. So I kind of looked into a few of those. And when I actually took a job at the St. Louis Zoo, I worked in their pathology department. And I thought about going the pathology route for a while, but I never landed on one specific thing to specialize in. So I never did go down that path.
Still kind of fun to have different experiences. Like, how did you even know about the opportunity at the zoo? That's kind of interesting.
So I had been in private practice for a couple of years by then, and I'm a pretty ambitious person. Once I feel like I've mastered a certain area or a certain skill, I kind of look at what's next. So I had just been kind of looking at job boards for the veterinary industry. I'm from St. Louis, so of course I was looking in the St. Louis area, and there was a posting for a quarantine and pathology technician at the zoo. And I applied and I was like, I am never going to get it. There are so many people that are going to want this job. And it was a full 6 or 7 week multi-interview process. And I finally found out that I got it and got started there. And it ended up not being what I was looking for as far as I loved pathology. My second day there, the pathologist and she was amazing. Dr. Mary Duncan, she is an amazing pathologist. My second day there, we necropsied a 2,000-pound takin. It's like a giant cow animal, ruminant. And she was doing a rumen mapping project. So we had this whole rumen laid out on the floor and looking at everything. And the takin had actually been euthanized for chronic arthritis. And this necropsy, I'm pretty sure start to finish was like a 3-day process because of the size of the animal. And instead of just being like, okay, let's catalog these parts and weigh the heart and weigh everything and do what we got to do, she had me on the floor with her, disarticulating joints and showing me how you can see chronic joint disease on an animal, and was just a really great teacher. And I was really thankful for that, because some veterinarians kind of look at you as you're just a tech, you're just here to be my sidekick and do what I say. But she was a very educational veterinarian and really took her time to instruct me. So it was a really fun job to have. On the pathology side, I wasn't really in love with the quarantine side of the job that I had. And so after a little bit, I decided to go back to private practice for a while.
Did it change in kind of what you were looking for yourself in your career going forward, or?
It did. At the time, I honestly thought I was crazy because, and I think clients get this idea too, and I'm not really sure where it comes from, but a lot of clients will say oh, you're in it for the money in this field. And anybody who's in this field knows you do not get in this field for the money. But the St. Louis Zoo was double what I was making in private practice. And I was really young at the time, just starting out. My husband and I, we were 22. And so when I left the zoo, I thought, I am insane. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. This is what every technician, dreams of going into. And I felt like I was kind of taking a step back at first by going into private practice. But after I left and was out of the zoo for probably a month or so, it really started making me think about what I really wanted in my career and making sure that any steps that I made going forward were getting me to the place that I really wanted to be, and not just taking the next thing to get out of private practice.
Yeah. And can you put that to words? What were you looking for your career?
I started to get interested in nutrition. I was the veterinary technician in charge of inventory or nutrition inventory at the private practice that I was at. I went back to the same private practice that I was at when I left the zoo. I was at the same one prior to going to the zoo. So they put me in charge of nutrition inventory, and we carried Hills, Purina, and Royal Canin, and we carried all 3 diets for all the same medical concerns. And I thought, why do we have 3 different nutrition providers for all of the same needs here? This is a lot. And so I started taking continuing education on principles behind nutrition and how it helps medical concerns, to try to deep dive into the different brands and which maybe offered more of what our needs were for our patients. And I really got into it and looking at those CE courses. And so that kind of became my next goal in mind, was I wanted to go work for a major pet food company. And I actually applied to Royal Canin probably a year and a half after being back at private practice when I left the zoo. And I got turned down the first time that I didn't have enough clinical experience. They really wanted their technicians to have a solid understanding of various disease processes, so that we could, just kind of have to learn more of the nutrition behind how to treat those processes. And I really hadn't been in the field for that long. So I stayed in private practice about 2 years longer. Or I'm sorry, not private practice. I stayed in private practice for another year. And after I got turned down the first time at Royal Canin, I saw an opening at Banfield. And I knew that Banfield was owned by Mars, and so was Royal Canin. And I thought, well, that's still a good way if I go to Banfield to improve my clinical practice and get more experience in clinical concepts, but get a feel for the culture behind Mars and see if I even like the Mars culture before I try to get my foot in the door with Royal Canin again. So I ended up going to Banfield for about a year, working as a veterinary technician there. Lo and behold, the same position that I applied for at Royal Canin a couple years prior opened up again. And I applied again, and that time I got it.
So what was the role that you ended up getting with Royal Canin?
Initially, it was the Technical Services Veterinary Technician. So my job was to consult with veterinarians, consumers, and breeders on which Royal Canin products would best suit their patients' needs based on various medical concerns that they had. And there was a team of 6 of us. We serviced the entire United States.
Yes. So, I mean, I have a little behind the scenes that I worked with this team. I was part of the team. So what were some of your biggest learnings from doing this? Because I mean, it's a hard job. You're on the phones, you're talking to different people, trying to help them. So what, and not just that aspect of it too, but just overall the whole job, like what were some of the biggest learnings you took away?
I definitely got a lot of experience in dealing with different personality types. When you're talking to the general public and breeders and veterinarians for 8 hours a day about something so close to people's hearts, their pets are part of their families, you really get a good feel for how to deal with the different personality types. I will say that. I also learned to kind of slow down in different processes. I'll never forget one of the first calls I took within that first month of that role. Somebody called literally 15 minutes before we closed, and it was just myself and one other veterinary technician that had been there about a year longer than me. And this person said, I need to speak to somebody because your product killed my cat. And I thought, I'm brand new. I don't know what to do here. So of course I took all the product information, and we had a specific database that we used to log our calls and the notes regarding the call. And this database reported to our headquarters in France. Like, it was a big deal. And so of course I marked the concern as death complaint because that's what the person was calling about. And unbeknownst to me, this whole complaint and everything went to like the highest of the highest people at the company in France. And a couple weeks later, the veterinarian that was in charge of our team followed up with the pet owner and got more details. And she pulled me aside and said, Alicia, why did you mark that complaint as a death complaint? Like, this turned into a really big deal. And I said, she told me the product killed her cat. And she said, the cat jumped out the window after she ate it and ran away. And the pet owner took that to mean that the cat hated our product so much that she just ran off to die somewhere. And I'm like, okay, clearly I need to slow down and gather as much information as possible from people and not let, these different personality types that are yelling at me and very adamant that our product had something to do with their pet's demise. I need to not let that get to me and remain professional and get as many details as I can. So that was a big learning for me too, is just, and I still do that today. If something is not clear to me, I have no problem slowing down and saying, can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Whereas before I just kind of took whatever somebody said at face value and ran with it.
Yeah. Oh, what a good lesson, right? Is just keep staying curious. Don't panic, right? Number one rule, don't panic.
Right.
I had a very traumatic first experience too. There's something about your first month, like the first really big deal that you get, it seems to be ingrained into you and you learn a lot from it. So thank you for sharing that. So what were some of the other things that you enjoyed about this role?
I really enjoyed that the company invested in our learning and our education so much. They had an amazing training program where we learned not only about nutrition, obviously, but just various professional skills. We were entrusted with making product recommendations to veterinarians. Obviously, as a technician, you can't diagnose or prescribe, but they definitely trusted our background and our knowledge to allow us to have conversations with veterinarians that guided them towards product choices. And I really, really enjoyed that. The company was also great about letting me work cross collaboratively with many teams. So I did a lot of projects with the internal communications team. I worked with the regulatory team, with some competitive intelligence. It was just really nice that you don't get those kind of experiences usually in a clinic. Obviously, there's not usually multiple departments to work with. So it was nice being able to experience multiple aspects of the business. And then at that point, I started looking towards, I had already had a bachelor's in business that I got after I graduated vet tech school. And with working cross collaboratively with all of these teams, I knew that in the future, I didn't want to stay in tech services forever. I still wanted to serve pets in some capacity while working at Royal Canin, but I didn't want to be in the customer care division forever. It really, for me anyway, it kind of became very mentally taxing and exhausting. And I felt like I had grown out of that role. So I started working towards my MBA at that point while on the tech services team, which I was very fortunate that Royal Canin covered and was very gracious of them. And once I got my MBA, I started looking at other areas of the business that I'd be interested in. And a former colleague of mine that was on the tech services team, Lauren, she had gone into sales in our breeder pillar. And she did a phenomenal job. I think she won some big award, like an MVP award, her first year in that position.
Wow.
Yeah, she's amazing. So another position opened up on that team for the team that managed breeder accounts. And she said, I think you'd be really good at this role. And I thought, I don't know. I'm so not typically a salesperson. I'm not very, I don't know, chatty and outgoing in that way that I think of as a salesperson would be. And she said, no, I think you'd be really good at this role. You know, you still get to use your technical services knowledge to make product recommendations to breeders, and you already talk to people all day anyway, but you wouldn't be tied to the phone 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So I applied for that role and ended up being one of 2 national account managers for the feline breeder pillar my last couple of years at Royal Canin.
And I want to back up just a second, because you said after going to vet tech school, you went and got a business degree, and then you've gotten your MBA on top of it. So to me, that says you see something about business, the importance of business. So can you speak to that? Why did you make those decisions? Is there something that you notice that's important to understand those concepts?
For one thing, I didn't want to stay in clinic forever just because there's a huge emotional burden there that we can definitely revisit too. Also a big physical burden. I mean, I was in my early to mid 20s when I started at Royal Canin coming out of clinic. And even back then, being so young, I would come home at night in pain. I still have a scar from a puppy that didn't mean to. She was just playing around, but it's physically taxing. And so even when I was in private practice, I started looking towards the business aspect of the veterinary field because I always wanted to serve animals in some capacity, even if it wasn't being in clinic. And I feel like in today's climate, you almost have to have some sort of a college degree, no matter what you do, in a lot of circumstances. And I knew that if I wanted to go into industry, whether that was Royal Canin or wherever I wanted to go, that I would need some sort of probably business background. It's a very good kind of general, degree that encompasses a lot of different areas. And after working cross collaboratively with so many teams at Royal Canin, I was really interested in how all these different teams came together as a whole to keep that entire organization running. And so I became very interested in more of the business side of things and decided to pursue that higher level degree a little bit further.
Yeah. Yeah. I firmly believe that maybe we all need like a business minor just for life or something, because they are very, very practical skills that are going to be very helpful and relevant in multiple areas of your life. Now, leaving Royal Canin, you said you left to be a mom. So you was that for your first child that you left, or was that your second?
That was my second. So I actually had my first child while I was in the technical services team. And then my sales role, though, being a national account manager, there was a lot of traveling to cat shows, which were really fun, very interesting. But it was a lot of travel. And when I had my second baby, unfortunately, we didn't have the same level of family support as far as childcare that we had available to us with our first child. And anybody that pays for daycare nowadays knows it's insanely expensive, and it just didn't make sense at the time.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to be away from my family that much at that point, especially with having a new baby. So at the time, it just made the most sense for me to kind of step away and be a stay-at-home mom for a bit. So I took, I think, right at or a little over a year off after I left Royal Canin.
Yeah. And I apologize. I said you left to be a mom. You're always a mom, but stay at home mom. That was a very important word I left out. So you said a year and a half. So what did you do after that?
I went completely outside of my element. So actually, before I got the national account manager position at Royal Canin, I had worked my way up into more of a senior role on the technical services team. So I was taking escalated calls from angry customers and helping our team manager with some measuring of metrics of our team members. And I really liked that. I thought that was really cool. Making spreadsheets and digging into the data behind our call center metrics. How fast are we answering those calls? How many of those calls are we dropping? So I thought that was really interesting. And when I decided to re-enter the career field, I was looking at more of a data position because I wanted to see if that was something that I would like long term and develop those skills a little bit further. So I actually saw a posting for a local grocery chain that we have here in St. Louis and in Illinois. It's more of a regional chain now, but they had a negotiations and planning analyst role, which sounded really fancy to me. And I thought, oh, that sounds like a cool job. So I'll try that out. And I ended up getting that position. It was a brand new position for that company. Nobody had ever held it before. And basically my job was to implement this new process for the category managers to get more funding from major vendors. So Kraft sells their products in the grocery store. So every year we would renegotiate funding with them to get more money in exchange for shelf space allocation. Do you want your product to be on the prime area of the shelf, or do you want it on the bottom if you don't give us X amount? So that was kind of my whole job was to negotiate and come up with the negotiation plans with the category managers. Literally my second week there, I vividly remember coming home and looking at my husband and saying, I don't know what I'm doing here. This is not what I'm passionate about. There was, at least with Royal Canin, even though I wasn't hands-on helping animals in the clinic anymore, I knew I was helping them on the back end by making sure that their veterinarian had all of the choices laid out to them of how they could nutritionally help their patient. And I was still helping pets in some degree. At this grocery store, I didn't feel like I was making a significant impact to anybody, human or animal. And that's not to, say that anybody that works there doesn't make their own impact in whatever way they think they do, but I didn't feel an emotional connection or like I was making a difference anymore. And that was my second week. And my husband was like, well, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to, just quit. Go back to being a stay-at-home mom. And I said, no, I like to give at least a year in any position because, sometimes you don't like things at first. And after a couple months, you think, I've got the hang of this now. I thought it was me. I thought, I just don't have the hang of this job yet. Let me get into it a little bit more and it'll be fine. And it never was. I worked that job for a little over a year. And I had to force myself, and it didn't help either that 2 months after I started that job was when the pandemic hit. So then we were all working from home, and I had a virtual kindergartner and a 2-year-old at home with me because our daycare shut down. Mm-hmm. Even if I wanted to pay for daycare like I had been to go back to work, I couldn't because they were shut down. So I just kind of kept telling myself, I'm like, no, it's the pandemic that's stressing me out. It's having the kids at home while I'm working that's stressing me out. And when everything kind of started to calm down with the pandemic, I realized, no, it's that I need to be back in the veterinary industry. That's where my home is. That's where I belong. And with everything going on, I just finally ended up walking away from that job after about a year and saying, I am not going back to work until I find something in the veterinary industry that I am passionate about and that uses my skills to the fullest potential.
Yeah. And what did you find?
So I actually just recently took a position with VetSource as their trainer for their tier 1 call center. And I also do quality assurance for them as well. So looking at those metrics again, like I was looking at or starting to kind of dig into it, we're looking at. So I actually get to do that piece now. And VetSource is a veterinary pharmacy. They do home delivery for clinics that they partner with. And so I am back to helping animals again in the industry capacity.
Does it feel more right?
Yes, I definitely, I told my husband, I said, I'm home. I'm going home. When I got the job, I was like, I'm going home to where I belong. And I could not be happier, truly.
I love that. A conversation that I just recently had with another veterinary technician, she used similar language around. And so I want to kind of come back to that question again on, I put out a post on LinkedIn about wanting to have more veterinary technicians on the podcast. I wanted to highlight the veterinary technician voice. And you were one of those who answered that call. What was going through your mind when you saw that post and wanted to share?
I think one of the biggest things was just that, when I was in vet tech school, in my mind, it was, I'm going to go work in a clinic forever. That's my career path. That's what I'm being trained to do. And I didn't realize there were so many other opportunities out there if you are driven and you prove yourself and you really, truly want to be in this industry. You can go into so many different career paths and not let yourself get to a point where you hate the veterinary field because of the burnout. That is such a big, I feel like there's different dimensions of burnout in this field that everybody is going to encounter at least one of them. You're at least going to get the physical burnout at some point, because I remember when I first started, my husband was like, I don't know why you're so tired. Like, you play with puppies and kittens all day. And I'm like, let me tell you about the 75-pound German Shepherd that I lifted by myself onto the x-ray table today and restrained. So there's that piece. And then for a lot of us, there's the emotional compassion fatigue to battle with. And if you don't look at other avenues, I feel like it could really cause you to hate the profession and become very bitter towards the profession. And I think if you get into this field to begin with, there's a reason. Not everybody can be in this field and do the things that we do and endure from an emotional perspective. it takes a special kind of person. It takes somebody with a true passion and desire to want to help animals. And so I think everybody should know that there are other paths out there. Clinic is important. Obviously, we need people that are able to be in clinic to serve those pets in a physical capacity. But I think everybody should know about the other avenues too, so that they can still serve pets in some way and not let that potential bitterness keep them from staying in the industry in some capacity.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the emotional toll, and you said we can come back to that. So was there more on that piece that you've experienced and maybe are seeing in others in our profession?
Yes. I know that when I was working in clinic, there were a couple times that I encountered veterinarians that were very, I'm not sure the right word. I don't want to say cold, but that's how it came across. Very cold about euthanasia. And I think that for some people, that's their way of masking the emotion and turning it off, because there was a time when I first started in private practice, I would come home almost every day just sobbing because my fur babies were my babies. I didn't have human kids yet. And even when I did have human kids, of course, I loved my fur babies, but they were my children. And I would just sob and think, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to make that decision one day? And how do people do this over and over and over in the profession and go through this? I thought, okay, well, maybe that's their defense mechanism. And I'm sure for a lot of people it is. To me, I feel like when you get to that point, you probably should step back and say, do I still need to be in this profession? Do I need to start looking at other areas of the industry if I'm getting to a point where this doesn't affect me anymore? For me personally, I really kind of felt the compassion fatigue and the drive to really get out of clinic and make sure that if nutrition positions were opening up, that I was looking. There was a day that I remember vividly. It was about 10 years ago now. It was in 2012. It was right before I found the position at Royal Canin. I was working at Banfield, and this 5-year-old lab came in, yellow lab. And you know how labs are. They're just like tail wagging, looking at y'all, hey, what's up? And so the doctor that was working that day brought him to the back area. And I had just finished up a dental cleaning, and I was, getting everything in the autoclave, getting everything cleaned up, ready for the afternoon appointments. So she brought this 5-year-old lab back, and I said, what's up? Is it a drop off? Are we just doing vaccines and yearly physical? Owners will be back later, because that happens a lot.
Yep.
We are booked back to back to back. And so when we're not booked back to back, we've got the drop offs to see. And she said, nope, he's already had bilateral TPLOs, and the owners were non-compliant with his weight loss. He blew his other knee out, and they're euthanizing him.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, sorry. And I said, how old is this dog? And I pulled up his chart, and I'm like, he's 5 years old, And she said, they're not going to pay for another TPLO. They don't have the discipline to comply with the weight loss. They weren't keeping up with the weight loss diet. They weren't able to keep up with the exercise with their schedule. So they signed the consent for euthanasia and left him, didn't even stay with him, which I understand. There are times that people cannot, but this to me just felt like such a betrayal for this poor dog. And to top it off, like I said, we were booked back to back. This was right after lunch. And she said, you're the only licensed vet tech here today. I have to go see these rooms. I am behind. You have to do it. Because in the state of Missouri, a licensed tech can euthanize as long as the veterinarian is there and on site. And I was like, I don't want to. I don't want to do this. He is otherwise healthy and young. And if it weren't against the law, I would take him home with me now. And she said, I understand you don't want to, but you have to. I have to go see these rooms. Let me know when it's done. And I will never forget crying, placing the catheter, injecting the euthanasia solution, and just staring into this big lab eyes that they have and saying, I am so sorry that humans failed you like they do a lot of animals, and just petting him and crying until he was gone. And at that point, I was like, I am done. I am so done with this industry. I had another experience when I worked at the zoo where I was made to euthanize a stray cat that was trapped near the bird cages that they didn't want getting in there. And that was more like a bullying experience from the more senior techs that were there. And so I had already had to euthanize animals when I didn't want to and didn't feel like I should be made to. And at that point, that was like my last straw. And if I hadn't found that job at Royal Canin, I truly think I would have been out of the industry completely.
I think a lot of people in this industry have similar stories that they remember just as vividly. As you said, that was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And listening to you, watching you relive it. So what would you say to people who are in similar situations? They're feeling a similar way. What would you say to them?
I would say you got into this field for a reason. You have the passion, you have the knowledge behind you to still be able to serve animals in some way if that's what you want to do. There are so many places that you could go to. Pet care is becoming such a huge industry now that it wasn't even 10 years ago when I was in practice, especially now that more people are working from home. The job that I'm doing now is working from home. So there's a lot more flexibility there too, that you could find something that works with your schedule if you're a parent or if you're just busy in general. So never stop searching for those other opportunities. I know that NAVTA for vet tech specifically has job boards on their website that you can look at. I used to just go on Indeed and type pet care industry instead of a specific role and just see what comes up. But there are so many different things that you can do and still use the knowledge that you have gained from working in practice. Don't let the compassion fatigue, especially the emotional side of it, don't let that turn you bitter toward the industry as a whole and still be able to go on and help animals that need it, even if it's on the back end.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. That poor veterinarian, that was probably not the first time that, I think you said it was a she, that she's been faced with that situation, and that may be her way of dealing with it. So I think it's important to be self-aware, allow yourself moments to check in with yourself, see how you're feeling. And another thing is to make sure you have a really good, strong community around you. And some of us have significant others who are somewhat familiar with the animal industry, others not. Mine is in IT. And I'm guessing that yours is probably not, if you thought you were playing with puppies and kittens all day. So as wonderful as our families are, they don't always understand. And so I think it's really important to find people in the profession who do understand. So I think finding a really good support network is really, really important in our profession. We really need each other. We really do. Did you have really good support systems in the profession that you can remember that kind of got you through?
I had a couple. My first practice manager, her name was Lonnie. I think she's still the practice manager at that practice. She was awesome. Any skills that I needed to improve on, she was very honest with me and would allow me to have the necessary practice to be able to develop those skills. When I went to Banfield, there were a couple of the other veterinary technicians that were really encouraging. I will say, though, this industry, I think I was reading over 60% of veterinarians are female, and I think over like 82% of veterinary technicians are female. Mm. And I think that opens the industry up for sometimes a little bit of cattiness. Sometimes I think that women as a whole, we have to work just a little bit harder to be taken seriously, especially in a medical role. I've literally heard clients say, when they're booking an appointment, I want that lady doctor. And it's like, lady doctor, really? I think that we have to work harder to be taken seriously. And I think that because of that, sometimes maybe there's women that feel like it's a competition. And when they advance, instead of holding that ladder for the next person in line, it's no, I'm going to pull that ladder up so that somebody can't follow me. And so I think that with the industry being so heavily populated by females and that dynamic and that competitiveness, it can be really hard to find your tribe and find that support. That is one thing that I think really needs to improve in the industry, both in clinic and outside of clinic in the industry roles too.
Mm-hmm. I was having a conversation about that, and it had nothing to do with the veterinary industry. So, I did a shorter video about it was with a guest, but I kind of took a clip out of the episode around bullying in the industry. And what do you know? I think I even called it something about Mean Girls.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with a bunch of boys, and I had a bunch of brothers. And I'm serious sometimes that for some reason guys can just duke it out and they're
Mm-hmm.
and then they're friends again. But girls can sometimes get meaner. We hit buttons that are deeper. And I think that is a very good call out. We need to look at life encouraging each other from an abundance mindset. Just because you support another person, another woman, doesn't take away from your own glow. It actually, with an abundance mindset, when you actually realize it, that when you're giving out that glow, when you're helping another person, it actually just enhances your own. It enhances the total glow in space. And I think as human nature, we get into more scarcity mindset where we're scared if that we support someone else. It means that there's less of the pie instead of just making the pie bigger. So thank you for calling that out. I think it can be harder to sometimes find support in it's becoming a very woman dominated industry. And so, yeah, I echo that call to be the difference, be the change, be the example. And it's actually contagious too. Both ways are contagious. The scarcity mindset, but also the abundance mindset. So I think when we start acting like that and show it, I think it will start to grow. Like I said, it adds to the glow, doesn't subtract. Any industry, anywhere, inside vet, outside vet, but we just happen to be very women dominated. So it can be highlighted quite a bit.
You asked what my big lessons were at Royal Canin. And actually, now that we've kind of talked about this, that was a big lesson there too, because one of my managers, the person that ended up taking over the technical services team after the veterinarian that was managing it moved on to another role, we got a manager who used to be in HR, and then she started managing our team. And she was phenomenal at giving us developmental opportunities. There were times that I interviewed for several roles at Royal Canin before I got my sales position, and I didn't get those opportunities. But every time I didn't get them, she would sit me down and say, okay, here's the feedback. Here's what they said that you should work on going forward. Let's do some mock interview practice. Let's talk about how, they said you need more experience in this area. Let's talk about what team you can work with to get more experience in that area. I was like, Claire, are you sure you want to develop me out of this position? Because I'm good on your team, I'm really good at this. And she's like, I don't want you to get, so burned out in your role. I know that you've already mastered this role, and I want to develop you if that's what you want. And if you ever want my job one day, I will develop you for my job, because then that's going to open up opportunities for me to develop into something else. So she definitely embodied that whole philosophy of let me help the others around me. That's going to help me to glow more. And I mean, as far as I know, I think she has moved on to bigger and better roles within the company, and she absolutely deserves it because she was so amazing at helping all of the people around her. And she was never scared of, oh my gosh, well, they're going to look better than me, So that was a big takeaway from working there too.
Yes. I was pretty sure it was Claire that you were talking about. She is amazing. She's not from the veterinary industry at all, but now you're bringing it up. I think she would be a great person to share some of the things, because she was really successful. She was very loved by everyone. And looking at the company, it was her team, the customer support team, which is one of the hardest jobs, I really firmly believe, in the company. And I feel like her team had the best culture. And it was her leadership and building up other leaders around her and the team. She was constantly building people up. So yes, I again, I have some insider knowledge on that story, but Claire is amazing. So I am glad that she further illustrated what is possible and that we can do that same thing, because there were a lot of women on that team. In fact, all the veterinary technicians, at least on the team, were all women.
We were all women.
Yeah. So that's awesome. Yeah. Well, is there anything that I should have asked, or you still have left in the tank that you want to share?
I think the only other thing that I wanted to share from a veterinary technician perspective, especially when we're talking about working in a clinic, is I beg any veterinarians that are listening, please use your veterinary technicians to their fullest potential, especially your licensed credentialed technicians. And I say that because legally, there are things that credentialed technicians can do and that they have been trained to do in school. I know that some of the practices I worked at, I wasn't even allowed to read an ear cytology. And I'm like, I know what yeast looks like. It looks like a snowman. Let me read it. And then there were other practices where they were like, read the ear cytology, do a manual CBC differential for me. And I love that. I'm like, oh, yes, let me look at all these neutrophils and let your veterinary technicians use their skills to their fullest potential, because I firmly believe that is also a key piece of burnout. You have a lot of veterinary technicians that take their profession very seriously. They went through all the same schooling that a human nurse is going through. They sat for those board exams. They want to do what they were trained to do in school. That is, I think, a big piece of veterinary technician burnout is just sitting there saying, okay, I drew the blood. I collected the fecal sample, just let them do what they were trained to do and trust those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I was really excited again to see you reach out and get to talk with you and connect again. I think this was a really good conversation. You brought up a lot of good points. We're still positive. Like you said, you still felt like you were coming home. So there is so much good in this profession. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we just have a final 4 questions to wrap it up. And the first one is, what is something that you think people get wrong about you?
About me just as a person in general or as a vet tech?
Anything. Yeah, anything.
Oh boy. I think that people get wrong about me that I'm a pushover because I'm so quiet. I just have a softer demeanor and personality, but I absolutely can stand up for myself. And that is a skill that I have developed just over the years of even being in this profession, learning how to have difficult conversations and honest conversations with people in order to foster a better working relationship. So I think that is something people get wrong about me, though, is I tend to be a little more meek and quiet. And they're like, there's the pushover.
Watch out for the quiet ones. So they have power. They just know when to release it. Very good. And what is a hidden skill or interest you have?
I love to quilt in my free time. I love sewing. I love sewing baby clothes. With my second baby, I sewed a ton of clothes for him. I currently have a 5-month-old, my third boy. I have not sewn in a while. I just don't have time anymore. It's just easier to buy his clothes. that is something that I like to do outside of the profession.
Very nice. I hear someone running around back there. So
Sorry.
No, you're
Trying to keep them quiet, but he's 4 and it's impossible.
No, you're fine. What is something on your bucket list?
Ooh, I would love to travel to the mountains one day when my kids are grown. And eventually I would love to buy property out at like the base of the mountain somewhere and build a home and just retire there. That would be my ultimate goal on my bucket list.
That's funny. Being in the Missouri, you don't see too many huge mountains. So yeah.
Now it's flat. There's like not much here.
One day. Very nice. And finally, what is something you are grateful for?
I am grateful for my family, my husband and my kids. I don't think that I know I couldn't make it through life without them. And that's not to just have a cliche, but when we were talking about our support system, it's extremely important to have that support system within the profession. But even with my husband not having a veterinary background, sometimes I think that was actually better. He was able to support me better because he didn't have as many biases maybe. So I'm very grateful for my husband and my kids.
I told you this was an important episode. We need to encourage each other, bring each other up. This profession is challenging, but there are a lot of passionate people in this profession. Just think about what we could do if we were constantly encouraging one another. I hope you take this episode to heart. Like I said in the beginning, I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Do you know of someone in the profession who's really good at encouraging others around them? Please let me know. I would love to get them on the podcast and learn more about their story and their thoughts about how to make this profession better and better. If you like this podcast, give it a great 5-star rating and review. If you like watching on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe and continue to follow us on this journey. Until next time, take care.